The Health Recovery Services Board for September the 17th to order, and we will have roll call.
Reverend Gordon,
Present.
Mr. Albright,
Here.
Mr. Arnold,
Here.
Ms. Banks, Ms. Bell,
Here.
Mr. Brown,
Here.
Ms. Carter, Ms. Clark, Dr. Elhai. Here. Ms. Friedman, Ms. Harding. Here. Ms. Howe, Ms. Mendoza-Locke, Ms. Rodriguez.
Here.
Dr. Sada.
Here.
Major White. Here. Ms. White.
Okay, thank you very much. We'll have the recognition of visitors, starting with Richard.
Richard Arnold.
Liz Henrik with the Ohio Association of County Behavioral Health Authorities.
Tina Lason, board staff.
Julie Rupp, board staff.
Shannon Finch, board staff.
Amy Kirkmeyer, board staff.
Stefana Galloway, board staff. Charlotte Slaughter, board staff.
Mike Carter, board staff.
And you are,
And as
ma'am?
you come in.
And you are, ma'am?
Anita Helwig Sanchez, board staff.
All right, thank you. Welcome. We'll have the determination of items to be removed from the consent agenda, and I'll read them. The meeting minutes from August the 20th. Purchase of services for fiscal year 2024, increased allocation requests, which includes Zeph, Unison, and New Concepts. Ohio Moss Access to Wellness Funds allocation, Hospital Access Collaboration Pilot Program, which includes Ohio Moss fiscal year 25 Hospital Access Funds allocation, the Cedar Toledo ARPA Funds allocation, Civil Commitment designation, presenter, pre-screener, court diagnostic and treatment center. And last, the health officer designation. Those are the items for the consent agenda. Should any of those be removed? All right. Should we have our roll call vote?
I move consent. I move the consent agenda order.
A second.
Thank you.
Mr. Albright,
Yes.
Mr. Arnold,
Yes.
Ms. Bell,
Yes.
Mr. Brown,
Yes.
Dr. Elhai. Yes. Ms. Harding,
Yes.
Ms. Rodriguez,
Yes.
Dr. Sada,
Yes.
Major White. Yes.
Yeah, you can include that. Just give us. They go wandering around. Erica, you can just come this way.
Okay,
Oh, but not.
Ms. Carter,
We're voting on the consent agenda.
Consent agenda.
Ms. White.
Oops.
Present. Thank you. Present.
All right. Anyone else? Did they vote?
We're voting on the consent agenda. Ms. Carter,
You want me?
Yes.
All right, thank you.
Ms. White.
Yes.
Thank you. All right. So we're passed. Okay, that was easy, and we will now move to the funds allocation. Elijah.
If you turn to page 8 of your packet, we'll be talking about the addiction treatment fund allocation. This is just funding we get from the Ohio Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services to support our 2 drug courts at the Lucas County Court of Common Pleas and the Lucas County Juvenile Court. This is a mix of administrative funds that's dictated by the state, in addition to funds to use to pay for recovery supports, and then additional admin funds that we're able to provide providers based on their participation in the drug courts, the number of clients they see. There's also at the end, you'll see some purchase of services funds. This is again for non-Medicaid clients who need treatment services, and they are participating in the 2 drug courts. So we reviewed this at the P&O meeting, but the motion is there in the middle of page 9. Do you have any questions?
So this is the allocation that we discussed last week's meeting.
Yeah.
We knew there would be a conflict, so we pulled it off. That's it.
Okay, that's what I figured.
Any other questions?
Are you ready for?
Is there a motion?
I so move, I move the motion as presented here in the report.
I
Thank
second.
you. All right. Roll call vote.
Mr. Albright?
Yes.
Mr. Arnold?
Abstain?
Ms. Bell?
Yes.
Mr. Brown?
Yes.
Ms. Carter?
Yes.
Ms. Clark?
Yes.
Dr. Elhai?
Yes.
Ms. Harding?
Yes.
Ms. Rodriguez?
Yes.
Dr. Sada?
Yes.
Major White?
Yes.
Ms. White?
Yes.
All right, thank you. Motion passes. And now we have the director's report, Scott.
The moment you've all been waiting for. It is. First of all, we're not gonna do that vote stuff as people are walking in again. That was really awkward, wasn't it? We're not doing that. But I'm gonna give Michael a 2-minute warning because I want him to do a quick presentation on the Recovery is Beautiful Festival that we held and the Week of Appreciation. So I'm gonna handle a couple things first. First, Dr. Sada asked for what do we do with high achievers in our outcomes. And while we don't have a plan for what to do quite yet, we do actually have a list now of high achievers. So I'm not going to share this list with you yet because we want to put a plan together, but I just wanted you to know that we're working on it. We took it to heart. We think it's a great idea. And I think there's some conversation about maybe recognizing them during our recognition awards. But there's a lot more to come on that before we release this. We just need a plan for how to get that done. But, you know, from the list, compared to fiscal year 23 first, or calendar year 23 to first half of 24, we got quite a few folks that are doing pretty well. So there's a good, that's a good sign. The other thing I wanted to do is, we had a long conversation about our purchase of service contracts and how there aren't enough resources to sustain the growth in those contracts. Well, during and then after, I kind of felt something was missing. And the thing that was missing was us not telling you what the growth looked like. So I wanted to just follow up with you and tell you that as of right now, because there's still some more claims that can come in with some new people for up to 365 days from July 1, our providers, our contracted treatment providers, served 541 new people over what they served in 23. So in fiscal year 24, they served 541 more people in 24 24 than they did in 23. The dollar amount is 1.2 million more in dollars. Now, that doesn't mean those 541 people cost us 1.2 million, but we spent 1.2 million more so far because more claims will trickle in than we did last year. So when we talk about growth, that growth, I did not do the percentage, but I'll bet several of you could probably do it in your head if you wanted. It's probably somewhere around 12%. The number of people last year were 3,240, and fiscal year 24 was 3,781. So that's probably about 12% or so. That's just SILAC math, if you guys know what I mean. So that kind of rounds out that conversation. We have now scheduled meetings with 2 or 3 of our, I think it's 3, 2. We've already held one meeting. What we're doing is we're doing a, just like a community data collection. Tell us, here's the problem. We might not have all the answers. We don't have all the answers on how to fix this. From your perspective, what should we do? What does it look like from your end? If we were going to do this, how would that impact you? So that we get a good community conversation going before we bring you any recommendations. Because what we do know is if we experience another growth like this, which there's no reason to think that it won't keep climbing, we're going to have significant budget shortfall. We don't know what the answer is yet, but we are having the conversations, and it's likely that it will be some tough conversations in the future about maybe restricting services, maybe reducing eligibility criteria, maybe focusing on high acuity versus lesser acuity. We don't know what all that looks like yet, but we're rounding out our conversations with the providers, because the reality is we can't do this for the providers. It takes a lot of work on their end to do it, and we know ultimately that service reduction will likely occur no matter what we recommend. So how do we do the least harm to not just the individual that's receiving services, but the provider, because they're counting on a revenue stream, and then of course our community, and what are the downstream effects to maybe not getting the level of service that we had hoped to be able to provide.
Scott?
Yes, sir.
First question would be, you said spending year, so I'm assuming fiscal year ending June 30th?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir. So it's a lot more to come on that, but this is a significant priority for us, and of course for the providers, because they're the ones who will be impacted, beyond that of what the impact on the individuals that would receive these services might be. So we take this very seriously, and I just wanted you to know, just kind of rounding out that conversation from last time. Also, some not so great news, but I don't know. We have talked routinely about state opioid response, stimulant and response dollars, SOS. Well, the new round of SOS money has been put out there for application. The state released what they're calling a SOS 4.0 umbrella RFP, where everybody's in the pool now to compete for the dollars that are available. So the $3.4 million that we once got directly from Ohio Mouse without competing, or maybe quasi-competition, are no more. We are in the pool. Elijah is creating our application. There are significant bells and whistles and restrictions in the RFP that has caused us some considerable concerns about would we be able to sustain the programming that was in our portfolio of the previous SOS 3.1. Two allocations. So we have signaled to the agencies that were once received SOS 3.2 monies from us, that we believe that they should go out on their own and make their own applications for whatever they think they need directly to the state, because we will not be including them in any application that we are submitting. We are going to scale back a very reduced allocation or a reduced application around access to care, to try and keep that upward trend of helping people get care, but also then backfill some of the potential treatment dollars that are needed to fund those folks. This could be maybe a temporary, if we're lucky enough to get it, it could be maybe give us a little reprieve from having to make significant cuts in POS, but I wouldn't hold your breath on this. It's disappointing that the state has taken this tactic, and I'm saying it on the record so that everybody knows I'm disappointed in the way this has occurred, because we did not have any forewarning on what the process would look like, despite requesting it from our state association multiple times. We received the notice that there was an application, an RFP, just like everybody else did. We have no inside track that we're aware of, and it's a concern because you have, I think we have 11 different programs in our portfolio, which we can't tell you if they will be funded or not, how transition funding will occur, what happens if somebody doesn't get funded, how will they phase out because they're literally ends at the end of this month and the new grant's supposed to start at the beginning of October. What that looks like, I mean, it's not very planful, is I think the kinder way to put it. But I just wanted you to be aware of it in case you heard anything in the community, because I know many of you are involved with many other organizations. Yes, Senna first.
Just to make sure I'm following you. So prior to this, we didn't compete for these dollars.
Not-
We applied for them.
We applied for them. We had a preference of receiving these dollars, is the best way of putting it, with the other 49 boards that were in the.
Right, but it was at the board level.
Right.
At this point, if I'm hearing you correctly, that's why I want clarification. It's open to everybody.
Open to all eligible participants. Now, there is some definition around eligible participants.
Okay.
Government entities
Okay.
and nonprofit certified treatment providers.
Okay, so the programs that we have now, the 11 programs we have now, we've contracted agencies to help us, nonprofits that need to help us with those. Now, they can apply for their own monies?
Yes, all of them can apply for their own monies
Okay.
And their own programming.
and their own programming. And it's not just limited to what we used to give them. It can be whatever they request.
Okay.
So there, I don't want it to sound like there might not be opportunities, but I think I would rather have the 3.4 million for our community in hand, and then let them do the umbrella RFP for any additional monies that might be out in the community. Yes, ma'am.
Is this Is this the program, were you?
That's all right, go
talking to
ahead.
me? Oh, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
I'm sure. Sorry.
No, I was just gonna ask, how many, what's the total amount of dollars and how many awards are there going to be?
That's a really good question, which we didn't ask the how many awards, because that's really contingent upon the applicants and the amount. We still don't know how much is in the pool to play with. What we do know is, and Liz, you might know this better than me, it's, the allocation from the feds is about 100 million,
A little over 100 million.
but we don't know if all that'll be in the pool. Probably won't, because Ohio Moss carves some out for staff to manage.
That question has been asked and still remains unanswered to reveal.
Elusive. It is one of the rare occasions, by the way, where we, from our state associations, are in alignment with other state associations on how bad this could actually be.
I guess it's so concerning because even if our 11 programs all apply, only one could possibly get it, if that. And so that's
Potential.
just-
Now,
potentially.
there is some statements of regional equity, but we still don't know what that means. And that would be concerning to me anyway, because as you are aware, and I have reported several times already, Lucas County received the second most state opioid response funds in the state. So we were already on the high end, and if they make it a regional equity, we are likely to lose funds for our community, just based on that, a redistribution of the wealth, so to speak. And Nima, did your question get answered in any of that?
No. Is this the process that was two-tiered, that there was first a date when the applications opened up, or for the registration for applications, or something that opened up a couple months back, and then so that's a different program?
Yeah, I don't,
There was-
it definitely isn't this program.
Okay, yeah, there was something.
And the only other one that was open was the MRSS application that was just closed last Friday.
Okay, that's.
But I don't believe that that was a two-tier process either. I think that they registered for a bidders conference, but other than that,
Okay. And I guess my second question is, have the individuals in the 11 affected programs been notified by anyone of this situation and potential for wrapping up of that program?
So
and
we
services?
thought ahead when we signed the contracts last year, and they signed contracts that indicated there should be no expectation of continuation funding for these funds. I know where you're gonna go, that doesn't mean that they're following that, right?
Yeah.
When we found this out, I believe it was either that day or the day after, we submitted to all of the people in our portfolio, this is what's going on. You should seek your own funding. We will not be including you in any application moving forward. Because frankly, it's limited to 10 pages, the application.
Yeah.
We got 11 programs.
Right.
There's no way we could do their programs justice. Plus, there's fidelity monitoring that is undefined, that we don't have the capacity to do. It felt like it was an injustice to those entities that were funded to try and squeeze them into a 10-page application.
I guess my question was more, I understood you to say that we did notification to our agencies. My question is more to the individuals being provided the service.
Well, I can't speak to that because we don't
Okay.
have that
And-
information.
And that wouldn't be, that obligation is not ours, it's
That
the
is correct.
service, the
That is-
service provider.
that is correct.
Okay, thank you.
Tina?
Yeah, did they give any rationale for this decision? I mean, it just seems like a ton more work on their part, like the oversight and the monitoring of these grants that's traditionally and historically done by the people that are used to doing this, it just doesn't seem to make much sense at all. So I was just curious if they gave you any rationale for making this kind of a decision.
No,
Okay.
they did not.
Okay.
And we've asked that question. We asked the question when the MRSS grant was released, when we have no decision-making capacity related to that, even despite the fact that we give $336,000 to fund MRSS right now. And it's very disappointing to see this trend from the State Department. Now, they do a lot of things well, don't get me wrong. And I was quoted in the paper yesterday with giving them kudos on improving access and, improving quality. But this defies local logic. I'm not saying there's not a state logic up there or a Fed logic. We just don't know what that looks like right now. So, yeah, that was fun.
Yeah.
But we are going to end, any more questions on any of that? We're going to end on a positive note, all right? And I'm going to ask Michael, who I gave now 4 minutes to prepare, to just give us a quick little first on the Recovery is Beautiful Festival that was held last Saturday, and then upcoming Week of Appreciation.
Thank you to everybody that participated with Recovery is Beautiful. Our first preliminary numbers indicate that we had at least 471 people from the community participate. So we're excited about that. We had food trucks, taco trucks, ices, bounce houses, DJ. Bingo seemed to go real well. I don't know if it's because they love bingo or it was cool inside. But bingo seemed to go really well. Warner Center were gracious hosts. Patty did a phenomenal job and her staff of helping us pull that event off. And so we're definitely thankful. We get to do this every year and watch families in recovery play together, have fun together, paint together. It's always a very exciting event for us. And so again, I'm really excited that we get to do it as a board and we get to participate in just showing how valuable recovery is in our community. So again, thank you, kudos to our staff for the work that was able to be done. We also utilized Cherry Street's food truck this year. And so that they had a little bit of a positive food option. But again, people were enjoying their salads and different things that they had available. So we didn't just give them hot dogs and hamburgers this time. We also gave them strawberries and blueberries. And so every year now in September, we also get to do Appreciation Week. And for the last 7 years, we have been honoring primarily first responders. And again, this year, we're going to honor our first responders. We wanted to do something different. As many of you know, in May, we have our recognition ceremony. And we always have a first responder of the year. And so what we did was took the pictures that we have since we've been working with Credio, our professional pictures, and we took those first responders and we put them all on a poster. And we wrote some special messaging on that poster. It's got showing right there. And we created some white space in that poster. And we had staff and some from the Warner Center, consumers, begin to write messages of thanks and appreciation. And we're gonna ask all of you that are here today if you would be willing. We have 30 posters that we're asking you to just write maybe thank you, or like I wrote, you guys rock, or whatever it is you want to put on there with your name, just to show our community our appreciation. We're going to drop these off on Thursday. And we're going to drop them off with some glass cookie jars that we've got with a very positive message on it. And we're going to have cookies and things put inside that cookie jar, along with an advertisement that's going out to tell them how much we appreciate them in our community and that work. And it's just an opportunity for those who get to see the overdoses, completed suicides, and some of the more tragic things in our community as a reminder of not only self-care, but that there's a community that supports them and appreciates the hard work that they're doing. So when the meeting is over and the training, we have them on the table behind the cabinet, our makeshift wall there, that you will be able to just go around the table with different Sharpies and markers. If you can just write a quick message, we would appreciate it. Thank you.
You want us to mark on each of them or just one?
Yeah, as many as you can, right? There's 30, you don't have to do all 30.
And
but-
Michael, remind me, who funds this?
This is a this is a grant with the WAPA that we do every year. We also use some of our community engagement Ohio
Association of County Behavioral Health Authorities, who which the CEO is right there.
I know 4 to 5, right? It is a quiz. I didn't know I was gonna ask. But we're so thankful for that partnership, that we're partnering with them. They give us a grant every year, about $1,500, and we find creative ways to spend that money, to be a blessing to our community and just to uplift and give positive messaging. Last year, I believe it was, we did the emergency rooms and we gave them awards, and it went over so well. And it was a great thing that we did. But at the same token, I have to be honest, kind of miss going to the firehouses and the police stations and in different places. So this year we get to go back and see the first responders and get to see their faces, because they're not used to getting anything. They're not used to anyone stopping, just knocking on the door and say, hey, we're here with a gift. And you always see their faces and take that picture. So we'll be doing that this Thursday and Friday. Thank you.
That concludes my report.
All right, thank you, sir. Thank you, Michael. All right, so now we'll have open session with
there is a lot going on at one government center. Let me be brief. I just came to the county commission press conference. They fired the dog warden. Michael Hart will be the interim director. This being an election year, they were pressing him on, when are you going to have a new one? He's not going to go on record. But they made it, I'm quoting here, a lack of leadership across the board. They said we have to get rid of those here. So Michael Hart, who used to be with the homeless board, he is now the interim dog director. Along those same lines, our friends at City Council want to limit the number of dogs people can have. If I understand correctly, what they passed last week was they will work with the plan commission. They will try to come up with special use permits for people who own, I think, more than 5 dogs. It will be the plan commission, not the city council, that has to deal with this. So they're the ones that are going to be with angry dog owners that come and yell and scream. I don't know when the public hearing is going to be, but it should be in the near future. They want to limit how many dogs people come. Same thing with tobacco stores. They are all over the place. Remember, the plan commission has been completely consistent. They prove it. But by the time they get to city council, it gets very, very complicated. Just last week, city council shot down one on 27 Reynolds Road. There was no public opposition. They just said, we don't look like it. They have another one coming next month. It's at 135 South Bird. That owner, he already had one approved a couple months ago. Maybe they'll approve this one, maybe they won't. And one more in the pipeline at 1501 South Detroit. So they're going, at one point, to have this moratorium. I don't know when. They'll have a public hearing on it. But they will probably limit how many, special use permits for tobacco shops. They're really declared more. Along those same lines, the group home, if you want to call it that, some call it an adult family home, some call it an adult residential facility. This is in 2024, Robinwood. It's been there for decades. The owner stood before city council, and I'm quoting her. She said, I'm a former Carter bus driver. I inherited this home, and I don't know much about this business. Make of that what you will. I don't know. I testified. I said, hey, guys, they've already met with the Old Weston Association. Old Weston Association suggested they only go up to 10 beds. They can go up to 16. And I've been told that the city legal department said there's nothing you can do about it. Once they have got that special use permit, they can go up to 16. We'll see what happens. I would assume that the Old Weston Association will keep a very close eye on this. At Plan Commission last week, it was just downright depressing. We have this, what is it, Sheets 24-hour convenience store. They want to put a store, a 24-hour store on the Manhattan Parkway. They had people in wheelchairs show up. They had elderly show up, and they had their petitions. They did everything right, but it was a tie vote. It didn't happen very often. So in a event of a tie, it all goes through next month. Once again, October meeting Plan Commission, they'll bring all those people back and start all over again. And they'll plead with Plan Commission, don't give a special use permit to this 24-hour convenience store right in the middle of our quiet neighborhood. It was really depressing to see the elderly. They tried their best, and they left at this point. Indulge me just for a minute. With the second attempt on the life of Donald Trump by a ranged gunman, I can only wonder what this is going to do to the political campaign. For anybody that doesn't remember, I dug this out of a book called Death Lies and Handing on the Campaign. This was where Trump, as a candidate, when he was going against Hillary Clinton, he said, you know, I'm a gun owner back in New York, and these sickos better not mess with me. And the crowd would just go crazy. And he proposed he wanted to bring back institutions. He did try, as of February 2020, that's 1 month before the pandemic lockdown. Yes, he was proposing legislation that would get rid of, I believe it's called the IND exclusion. It's the government saying we will not spend Medicaid dollars on any facility that has more than 16 beds. It's the government's way of saying we're not going to pay people these lifelong, stays in state hospitals. He was trying to get rid of it. It's been in place since the 1960s, and then the pandemic came along, derailed everything. He'll probably go back to that. I wouldn't be at all surprised. He's had 2 attempts on his life. But remember, I'm trying to be fair here. Both parties do this sort of thing. This was in 2016. I opened my mailbox and I got this from the Ohio Democratic Party. Who said it? Trump or your crazy uncle? And it's a guy with the expression on his face that can only be called clueless. And you turn to the other side, you see all of these quotes. I'm not going to read them. They're not suitable for a public meeting. Take my word, they're pretty bad. But you're supposed to decide if Trump saying doesn't get your crazy uncle. It's a really lame attempt to find humor in the situation. And my point is, both political parties try to drag mental illness into their political rhetoric. If they think it's going to help, if they think they can make a point, they don't seem to care what effect it has on the speaker of mental illness. And so we need to look at a future where we're going to hear more and more talk about these shootings. How do we lock them up? And less talk about how do we help people live productive lives in the community. And if there's less talk about that, there's also going to be less federal dollars. So we need to look at a future where it's not looking good for the federal level. No matter who wins the election, it's not looking good for people living productive lives in the community. That's my opinion. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Richard. Anyone else? All right, our regular meeting is adjourned. Trustees will remain for our annual trustee training session. Thank you so much.
Okay, so that ends our regular meeting. We have a training, and those of you who've been around a while, you know that it is a requirement of Ohio Revised Code that once a year we do an in-service training. And I wanted to take the opportunity to bring our newly minted CEO, Elizabeth goes as Liz Henrich, depending upon what side of the family Liz is from. It was my pleasure to lead the team of state association members that brought Lynn into her leadership role. And she's no stranger to the board. She's been here several times and presented on roles and responsibilities. We appreciate her making the trek up north, as I'm usually going south. And we are going to treat this as a public meeting. But if by chance you have to leave because you can't stay the whole time, it's only going to be about 40 minutes to an hour tops, depending on questions. You will have the opportunity to review what you missed, or if you have to leave now, review the whole thing on our YouTube channel, and then just sign off that you attended. I take that information, the sign-off sheet, and put it in your board file here. So go ahead and pass that around there, Susan, for those of you who sign it. And Liz, I will just turn it over to you guys.
Sounds good, thank you. Is this okay, location, does that work? Okay. Yeah.
Wander around anywhere you want to go.
That's a dangerous question because I'll just be walking all over the place. First, I want to start this training with a thank you to the board members, to the staff, to those of you that are working in this community because you care about mental health and addiction services. We know specifically for the board members who are here volunteering your time because you're committed to this community that you probably don't get enough appreciation. And while we've got a week-long week of appreciation happening for folks serving the clients in your communities, we want to acknowledge your role as well and thank you for what you're doing on behalf of your communities. I also wanted to highlight that you are board members of a Culture Quality Certified Board. This is a peer certification that is run through our association, so it's board-to-board certification. What the certification team does is they come in and they review 140 different standards rooted in state, federal, local laws, as well as some best practices. Really what it means for you as board members that you can feel confident when you're not here on a day-to-day that your board operations are meeting the quality metrics, meeting the requirements, and in good shape. You are one of about 38 boards that are certified. If I recall correctly, you guys have been certified for several years with multiple recertifications. So we're gonna spend some time today on multiple different topics. I have a tendency of starting to talk very quickly and moving through these with some speed. Please stop me if you have questions on any topic. I want to make sure this works for you and responds to your questions, because we're going to kind of briefly hit on a number of different areas. I'm sure Scott tells you often, maybe not often, but as the president of our association, he knows well that we have 50 boards throughout the state of Ohio. And the reason that we have 50 boards is because local communities can respond differently to local needs. The board areas are different depending on where you are. We have 19 multi-county boards, one that serves as many as 6 counties. And then we've got 31 single county boards. You can see the map on the slide here. This gives you an indication of how services are delivered and operated in different areas of the state. The governing boards of all of the alcohol, drug addiction, and mental health boards are made up of volunteer community members. As of some recent changes, you are now appointed by county commissioners, the Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services in a new ratio, 2/3 to 1/3. In order to serve on this board, you have to be a resident of the district that you're serving on. You must have an interest in mental health or addiction services, and a few of you are serving in categorical appointment roles that we'll talk about as well. Half of you have an interest in mental health and addiction services, and this is one of the funniest parts of Ohio Revised Code 340 to me, because I bet there's not a single one of you that would say, I'm only interested in mental health or I'm only interested in addiction services. But by definition, the board has to have half of the members interested in mental health, half interested in addiction. One member must be a past or present recipient of services paid for by board funds. One member must be a family member of somebody who has received services, and one member must be a clinician. This is mirrored on the addiction side with one asterisk. If you have somebody who is dually licensed in mental health and addiction services, they can technically fill both of those roles. So there are those categorical appointments as well. Board members are appointed for a term of 4 years. I think I overheard some conversation about whose appointment date and how long that service runs. You can serve for 2 consecutive 4-year terms from one appointing authority, and then you can actually serve for an additional 2 4-year terms as long as you're appointed by the other appointing authority. The way Ohio law is crafted in this section, you can technically serve in a board capacity almost indefinitely, just rotating from one category of appointment to another should the appointing authorities continue that appointment. I don't necessarily recommend that 18 members serve in perpetuity on these boards. You want new engaged individuals, you want different community perspectives to come in, but officially that could happen. You serve without compensation. You can be reimbursed for actual and necessary expenses should you travel to a conference on behalf of the board or get shipped down to Columbus because Scott pulls you in when I ask him to come to a meeting. You can get reimbursed for your travel costs. As of last fall, some language changed in House Bill 33. What this did, which was the last biennial budget, this is where the change in appointments went from 1/3 and 2/3. It used to be that 8 of you were appointed by the state and 10 of you were appointed by county commissioners. That flip happened. There's also language that now allows on a somewhat cycle that starts after a decision is made, that allowed boards to make a change to the number of individuals serving on the board. If I recall correctly, you guys are sticking at 18 in this community. That representation is important. But we had some board areas that were having a hard time keeping their full boards filled or meeting quorum at different meetings or having enough people that didn't have conflicts in their community able and willing to serve on the board and wanted some flexibility in what that total number of board members were. Now the language allows for boards to have 9, 12, 14, 15, or 18 members. You may ask why 14? It's not divisible by 3, doesn't totally make sense in the new structure. About 10 years ago was the last time there was an option to change board sizes from 18, and 14 was the only option. So 14 remains as an option for those boards that are at 14 and wanted to stay. So
That makes sense.
what we know so far is there are a handful of boards that have made the decision to drop down from 18 to 15, 12. We know of at least one that did go all the way to 9 in one of our smaller communities. One board went up, and it was one of those boards that was at 14, and they decided to get to that easily divisible by 3, they'd bump up to 15 going forward. Once a decision is made, and this is not a decision that the board officially makes, it's actually your county commissioners that make this call. They have to do it in consultation with you, but once that decision is made, it starts a 4-year clock. And then a decision to change again couldn't happen for at least 4 years, so that it provides some amount of stability and you don't have a change every year as you go forward. If you don't make a change, you actually wouldn't ever start that clock until such time as maybe somebody does make a decision to change. So right now, at 18, nobody's stopping you from being at 18. The only change you experienced is the number of appointees. So we're going to spend a little bit talking about Ohio Revised Code Chapter 340. And this is this piece of statute that authorizes Adam boards and describes a lot of your requirements for the state of Ohio. Within Chapter 340, there's a number of components and provisions that exist there, but the function of this is that you are designed to assure that there is a unified system of care in your community. You are charged with creating that community support system of services for clients in your area. You still have a charge in statute to protect personal liberty and ensure that services are offered in the least restrictive environment. You have a responsibility for ensuring that high quality, cost-effective, and culturally competent services are available. You maintain comprehensive services based on local needs for the severely ill and special populations that are specifically called out, as well as ensuring that services meet minimum standards. You are not the entity that certifies services, but you can only contract with entities who are certified, and that is part of that minimum standard requirement. And then you do have a responsibility for requiring consumer involvement. This is both by having individuals with lived experience serving on the board, but also mechanisms that you're engaging individuals in services now to help drive decisions about the needs in the community and what services you are going to offer. You are the local public behavioral health authority. You do have that charge as the community needs assessment and planning entity. You do this on a couple of different cycles through your strategic planning process and through your community assessment and planning process that is both identifying what are the needs within our community and how do we plan to meet those needs over time. You have a responsibility for allocating funding and contracting. As Adam boards that don't deliver direct services, this is one of your biggest charges. Using public funds, local, state, federal funds, and purchasing services for individuals in need in your community. You have a charge, unlike other local entities, for local levy and resource generation. Adam boards have a little bit different language in this charge that you actually are promoting the creation of local levy generation. This is a little bit of the language that actually allows you to spend staff time on levy campaigns, unlike some of your other counterparts. So there's language and statute along with a couple of Attorney General opinions that push you to run local levies and utilize resources as you run those. And look at other resource generation. Local property taxes may not be the only mechanism to look there, but are there grants available? Are there other partnerships that can help bring resources into your system of care? And then you do manage funds. And as you know from your meeting today, and probably every meeting that you have state funds that you're working on, you have local funds that you're working on, you have federal funds that you're working on, and those don't all stay static, both in the quantity and in the mechanism for distribution. And we're going through a lot of that right now with changes in a couple of different places. You have an audit, compliance, monitoring, and evaluation responsibility. That is overseeing the contracts that you issue with public funds. You have a responsibility for advocating on behalf of your system services and the client needs. And then you have an official requirement related to civil inpatient and outpatient commitments. So when somebody is probated for inpatient or outpatient services, the board has a functional role in that. You have a legal responsibility connected to those, often contracted with one of your treatment agencies to deliver some of that service as well.
By probate, you mean it's court ordered?
Court ordered, so a civil commitment.
I just wanted to make sure that
Yes.
I was on board.
Yes, yes. You have a responsibility for collaborating with community partners. There's not a sector of your community that isn't impacted by mental health or addiction services. My guess is Scott and your staff and many of you serve on any number of local committees, local work groups, local task forces that are working in this space or in areas that are connected to this space. And part of your role is being the leader in the community on that, but also working with all those partners so that it is coordinated as much as possible to meet needs as well. You have funds that can do some of this, so do many of these other community partners. And to the best of the ability, you want to be able to leverage those resources to be effectively spent in your community. Again, you need to involve and obtain advice from persons receiving services. You have a public education and media relations expectation to be sort of the ambassadors for community mental health and addiction services in your community. The powers and duties is a list of requirements within 340. This duplicates some of what I just talked about, so I'm going to leave the slide with you and kind of jump into some of the other topics. We're going to spend a little bit of time on what's your role as governing board members. I'm sure many of you have served on boards in the past, both in the private space and in the public space, so this is going to be a bit of a refresher for you. As the governing board members, your responsibility is the big picture vision, setting the mission of the organization, establishing how you're going to review, is what we're doing meeting the expectations that we had laid out? Are these services meeting the needs that we have identified? Are we going in the path that we said we were going to a year ago? You also have a responsibility for agency fiscal oversight of the board funds. You're not at this level necessarily going to do the individual evaluations of your contracts and your contract services, but at this table, you're evaluating the board staff, the funding decisions that are made, and making recommendations for those changes in your community, for the contracts that you're authorizing. So that fiscal oversight and agency oversight. One of your biggest jobs is executive director appointment. That's the person who's running the show for you day to day when you're not here. So you have the decision-making authority for that executive director appointment. You appoint, direct, and evaluate the CEO. CEO, executive director in this case, directs board staff and runs the day-to-day operations. So you guys are here once a month at board meetings and maybe a couple of times for committee meetings. Scott's here day in, day out running the operations at your direction, but he's making those day-to-day decisions. You set the salary for the executive director. The executive director then sets staff salaries within a budget approved by you. You determine which reports you want from the board for each board meeting and what information you need in order to make the decisions that you're making at this table. Your responsibilities are to understand the mission of the board, familiarize yourself with the mission, the vision, the bylaws, your code of regulations, and your legal responsibilities. You want to attend and be prepared for board and committee meetings, ask questions, be engaged. It's unlikely if you have the question, you're the only one around this table who has the question, so you want to make sure you bring those forward. You also, as this body, develop and appoint what committees you want and how those committees inform you and bring information to you. Often that is also built out in your bylaws, in your governing documents, so you know what those are. But if there comes a time that you go, we need to reevaluate that. That is this body that makes that call. And then you determine how those committees kind of feed information back to you and what that process looks like, and how committee members are appointed to serve on those committees. You have a responsibility for ensuring that the board has the necessary programs and services in place to meet that local system of care, and to make sure that the board operations are equipped to meet that system of care. Do you have the right number of staff working in your communities? Are you meeting the needs that you have on the day-to-day basis? You have that financial accountability. We say that a lot because a lot of what you do is direct public funds in your community, so that financial accountability role is key. And you're responsible for maintaining appropriate relationships between and among each other, with the board staff and with the community. As Adam board members, you are publicly appointed officials. That comes with a few requirements as well. We'll talk about those a little later in the presentation. So we talk about the principles of governance that power exceptional boards. And this is a list, it's not one we made up, it's one that we grabbed from somewhere. But it is an important thing to keep in mind that you want to have constructive partnerships between board members, constructive partnerships with board staff, and within your community. You want to be mission driven. You want to know what your target is so you can evaluate whether or not you're making progress toward that target. You want to have strategic thinking and a culture of inquiry. You can't always just go, that's what we've always done, so that's what we should always do. This space is constantly changing and evolving, so what new things do we need to bring into the conversations as things are changing? You want to have independent mindedness. As much as you can have 18 members serving on the board indefinitely, it's probably not the best to meet the needs of your community. As the community changes, you want to bring new voices into this table as well. You want to have an ethos of transparency. You are publicly appointed officials serving on a public board. This is on behalf of the public, so the work that you do needs to be open to the public as well. You want to have integrity at all times. You want to focus on sustaining resources so that as you bring up programs in your community and you begin to set an expectation that that's a service that's going to be available in a year, in 2 years, in some amount of time, it doesn't get the rug pulled out of individuals. This is an incredibly hard task right now in the environment where you aren't making every decision about the funds that you've received in the past and what that model looks like going forward. So as much as you can have, hey, this is exactly our plan to sustain these programs, on August 29th, an RFA can come out that you had no anticipation of and no knowledge of that could upend some of those services in your community, and you just don't know. So as much as you could have had a plan, some of these things are outside of the control, but you need to control as much as you can within that and plan for the eventual possibilities that that changes. You want to be results oriented, you want to have intentional board practices, and that is you don't want to be freewheeling every time you come into a board meeting and say, today we're talking about this thing we've never talked about before, but have a process for how information comes forward. You do want to do continuous learning and have revitalization within those board seats. Okay, so these are the 2 sections we're going to call boring but important as we keep going here. This is Ohio Sunshine Laws, and then I'll tip into Ohio's ethics laws. These are refreshers for you. As public officials working on behalf of the public body, you do have to comply with Ohio Sunshine Laws. This means that Ohio's Open Meetings Act applies to meetings that you have. So meetings of the public body must be open to the public, and materials that you develop in the course of business or that the board develops are also open to the public. So for a public body, it's not only that you need to make votes in a public session, so you're taking action in open sessions, but also deliberating on public business in the open session. A lot of the emphasis on the how for open meetings really falls to your staff. And that is things like how the meetings are announced, what the schedule looks like, how the public is able to access this is being run by your staff via streaming on YouTube, some of those kind of things. But you as board members need to know that the public has a right to understand not just the decisions that you make, but how you got there. Where's the question bubbling up here?
Yeah, you do. How many, like, depending on how many board members you have, but what's the percentage if we were gonna get together and talk or work on a project together before it becomes a public meeting?
The technical language is a majority of the public body. The functional on that is if really any of you are getting together to talk about public business, you want to do that in an open session.
Got it.
So you have a responsibility for your deliberation on conversations to be before a public body. So you can meet in very small groups to digest what happened or to discuss it, but you don't want to be individually meeting with each board member to try and lobby for votes at the next meeting, because then that really is conducting business of the public body outside of the public. So it's as much of the deliberation of how you got to that decision.
I'm thinking more like committee meetings.
Committee
task
meetings,
forces.
whatever you want to call it. It's sort of be rose by any other name. It's all open.
Got it.
So they all your committees, all your task forces, all your work groups, they're still arms of you as a public body.
Say that again, but louder, please.
Scott was right.
You include me in on that.
She was like, there's 3 of us.
What
What about celebrations? That's what we had talked about.
How do we make sure it's public?
Again, making sure it's public is that you need to announce the schedule. You need to put out information about the time, place, and purpose of the meeting. You can do it by having a predictable schedule on your website. So if you meet the 3rd Thursday of every month, consistently at 4 o'clock in this room, you can post an annual schedule and make that available. If you are, for some reason, you need to have a special meeting or an emergency meeting, you have additional requirements for notice on those that should go to members of the media, be posted or pushed out in any newsletter or social media that you have to inform individuals of those meetings. And again, those need to have time, place, and purpose specifically outlined when it's special or an emergency meeting.
And if there was like a task force put together, that we would have to establish our meeting time.
Yep, you need to make that available.
Even if it's just for 4 weeks.
Yes.
Scott,
Public body, public business,
Right.
yes. You also do have a responsibility to provide for inspection of public records. So as a member of the public, I can come in and make a request of you to access information that you have. and you have a responsibility for making that available in a prompt manner. Prompt doesn't necessarily in this case mean immediate. You can have standard business hours for how those requests are received. But then upon request, Ohio law dictates a reasonable period of time for that response to be provided.
How much time is it?
Reasonable is not defined in Ohio law. Reasonable means reasonable. And the best example I can give you on that is if I came in tomorrow and said, hey, can I have copies of your board meeting packets for the last 2 months? My guess is you're gonna be able to send me a link to where they're posted on your website, and that's not gonna take very long for somebody to pull that together. But if I come in and say, hey, I'd like copies of all of your financial reports for the last 7 years, that might take somebody a little longer, so reasonable will take a little longer to pull that together. You can, in that scenario, charge me for the actual cost of materials, should I say I need paper copies. You, however, cannot charge for the staff time that it takes to pull that information together. And I know your team likely has a process for how they go through public records requests and what that looks like in order to get those responses back out. Again, it's important to have a records retention policy and a public records policy to make those available to the public so that they know the expectations for those. You are a culture of quality certified board, so I know you have one of those. You also have a record retention schedule that will dictate how long you maintain those records and what the disposal strategy is at what time. I'm guessing there's somebody on staff that can answer all kinds of detailed questions for what that looks like for you guys.
That's true.
That means you shouldn't shred those, you should keep them.
No.
You don't have to keep it unless you took explicit notes on it, at which case the responsibility actually lies with the board to have this material. So my guess is they've got a plan for maintaining all of the board packets, and if there is something that you're taking notes on that leads to a decision, they may have a process for collecting those from you. Your personal notes likely don't fall into some of these categories. When in doubt, the Auditor of State's Open Government Unit exists to answer questions. They have resources on their website. Generally in these, your first go-to when you have questions is gonna be your board staff, who may, if necessary, call in the local prosecutor or somebody if it gets to the point that it needs a legal review as well.
I almost always run it through John Burrell unless it's an easy, okay, here.
Where do you put your board meeting packets?
Yep.
Linked on your website, you know, stuff like that. So Ohio ethics laws is the next section. The application of Ohio ethics laws, they apply to all state and local public employees and public officials, and all private parties and corporations who do business with them. So technically, everybody in this room, likely at any given time, the ethics laws apply to them. So it's both the staff of your board, you as public officials, and those entities that are doing business with you. Everybody has different responsibilities within Ohio ethics laws. The design of these is to promote citizen confidence in the action of public agencies. The priority focus is to protect the public from the financial, family, or business conflicts of public service. The general rule within Ohio ethics laws is that whenever the personal, financial, or fiduciary interest of a public official, a family member, or a business associate is involved in an issue before the official, there is an ethics issue. We specifically say issue here because not every ethics issue results in an ethics conflict. We'll talk a little bit about some of those circumstances, but I'm not going to get deeply into those. You all know the context that you have in your community, the businesses that you are associated with or that your immediate family members are associated with, and you need to be aware and vigilant of do any of those ever become business before this public body. Conflicts of interest are one of the areas that we get the most questions about. So you can't use your authority or your influence of office to secure a thing of value if it could have substantial or improper influence upon the public official or the performance of your duties. You cannot solicit or accept anything of value if it could have substantial or improper influence on the decisions that you're making. So if a new agency comes to town, they park a line of new cars out front, and they say, hey, if you give me a contract with board funds, everybody walks away with a brand new car. What do you say?
No, thank you.
Perfect. Say no. Now that's an easy example that says, no, of course we can't do that. But you do then have to remain committed to kind of, okay, every time something new comes before it, or even continuing projects, where are you connected, where are your family members connected, and where are your business associates connected? And when you come up with, hey, I don't know if that's a conflict, that's when you want to have the conversation. You don't want to wait until after a vote. You don't want to wait until after a decision's made to say, oh, maybe that one was a conflict. You always want to be as proactive as you can. Again, your staff can be a resource here. I guess is your local prosecutor can be a resource here as well. We often talk in this space about public contract prohibitions. Again, you cannot authorize or use your authority to secure a contract. As boards, that a whole bunch of what you do is contract for public funds. This is a very key thing to keep in mind. Those funding relationships that you have, you cannot have on the flip side a fiduciary or a financial interest in the benefits of any of those programs. The easiest thing that we say here is you can't sit on the governing board of this board and serve on a governing board of one of the agencies that you're funding. That's a definite and direct conflict. And at that point, you have to make a decision. You're serving in a capacity that supports the field. Which role do you want to have? Because you can't keep it in both. There are some other prohibitions within Ohio ethics laws that we kind of keep on the top of your mind, and that is nepotism. You cannot authorize employment or use your authority to secure employment or employment benefits for any member of your family. Family in Ohio law in this section is defined as spouse, parent, child, stepchild, step-parent, or any other person related by blood or marriage who lives in your household. So if your spouse's second cousin lives in your basement, Ohio's nepotism laws apply to that relationship. You also have some post-service restrictions, and this is the revolving door. So you're all serving on this board for some amount of time, and some amount of time you're going to term out, and you're going to roll off this board. You have a 1-year period in which you cannot represent anyone before this board coming in to make contract decisions. So you can't say, I'm going to leave my service on the board, and I just know they got that new grant, so tomorrow I'm going to show up and apply for these funds. Because you were involved in some of the decisions made for how those would be pushed into the community, which is essentially using insider information to try and still personally benefit from that project. You cannot receive supplemental compensation. The board is not paying you to participate on the board, and nobody else can be paying you for your participation on this board. You also need to make sense here too. Make sure that you're not using the board title for something that will benefit you personally. And this sometimes is a tough one because you don't want to not talk about your role on the board. You don't want to not be an ambassador in your community about what this board is doing. But it becomes a fine line sometimes if you can't use your role on this board to benefit yourself. And then confidentiality. There is a lifetime prohibition on the disclosure and use of confidential information. So if it's something that was confidential when you had the conversation, most of that's not happening in open sessions, but may come up periodically if you need to go into executive session for some specific cause. If there's something that you receive as confidential information in the course of your service on the board, you at no time can disclose that information without first obtaining authorization to disclose.
So, mentioning that the function of being a board member and the CV would not be affected in this case with applying for jobs, correct?
Officially, yes.
Should not be mentioned.
Yeah. So, again, here's another resource. When you term off the board, you're welcome to use it there. How you use it in information about your community service roles can be useful, but if you're using it in an attempt to try and get a job, that's where you can run into that personal financial gain. So you just want to be cautious. That's where that's there. Again, another resource. We know we don't answer all your questions in a 10-minute presentation, but we want to leave you with some resources. The Ethics Commission has a number of FAQs on their website. They have a phone number that you can call and ask, hey, does this one run afoul of Ohio's ethics laws? You can go everywhere from a generalized question to asking for a ruling from the Ethics Commission. Generalized questions, they're probably going to answer over the phone. The ruling procedure and the process takes a while to finally get there. Another resource can be board staff and your attorney as well. The last topic of the presentation is not the good news tour. And this is, Scott asked me to do a bit of a budget forecast in what we're looking at in the next state budget. As I'm sure many of you know, Ohio is constitutionally required to have a balanced budget on a 2-year cycle. We are currently in the second fiscal year of the 24 biennium budget, leading off to launching into the advocacy period of the 26-27 biennial budget. At this stage, the Office of Budget and Management, who puts out the first forecast for state government, has instructed state agencies, so including Ohio MOS in this instance, to target the flat funding at state fiscal 2024 numbers within a results-oriented budget process. So each agency that wants to propose a new program or look at a new service has to find a way to fit it within the same size pie that they had in fiscal 2024. For OMOS, there is one exception to this, and that is that there is some allowance for state hospital operations. So those agencies that have institutions and some institutional costs kind of baked in because they have contracts in place that have growth for their employees, they have some flexibility for their institutional costs to maybe hit above where 2024 was. State agency proposals are due to the Office of Budget Management next month. The governor's executive budget then gets chewed around with the Office of Budget Management, with the governor's office, with those state agencies to finalize what that full package will look like, and it will be introduced to the Ohio General Assembly. The date that is targeted is February 3rd of next year. From February to the end of June, this will become a legislative process. The Ohio House will take their stab at it. The Ohio Senate then usually gets the second part of that time period for a conference committee in late June with a target of July 1st to have that next budget enacted. We say target of July 1st because the last two times they've missed that deadline and they've been a little bit further into July once they've finalized things. Going into this budget, some of the pressure points that we already know exist is the end of many one-time fund sources that were used in the last budget across the state budget, not just the OMOS budget, but across the state budget. There were many one-time fund sources that plugged holes and expanded programs. On a regular, we are seeing tax revenues come in just a little bit lower than anticipation, so we're not as strong in our revenue sources right now. We are anticipating a shift in the Ohio General Assembly. If you pay attention to Columbus politics in any way, you know that it's not operating super well right now between the Ohio House and the Ohio Senate. Is that an accurate statement? Not super efficient in the work that they're doing. The odds-on estimates for the next General Assembly that will be seated in early July or early January is likely, based on everybody's forecast right now, and I will say that right now, that we will see the current Senate president possibly become the next Speaker of the House. It will then be his sort of self-selected Senate member that becomes the next Senate president. And we anticipate a much better working relationship between those two chambers if those two gentlemen are in the lead on those two places. Both of them have fairly fiscally conservative mindsets. Neither of them deeply prioritize mental health and addiction or even broader health and human services. Their areas of interest, we won't say that's not an issue, but they're much more business oriented, tax minded. They both like to do things like eliminate the income tax in Ohio. I think they both also acknowledge that that's not a just one and done thing because that results in a giant hole for services that need to be funded, but that will be some of their push, some of their priorities going into the next biennial budget. The governor is starting with a focus on the return on investment. This is a space that often it can be very hard to calculate effectively a return on investment.
Yeah.
Every prevention dollar that you spend is not going to have a return on investment inside of a 2-year budget cycle. We're hoping to make changes generationally with these investments. What an effective outcome is for some of the clients that we're serving might not look like a cost savings for public systems. So it makes it hard to define a return on investment in our space. And it's something that collectively we need to work on in terms of telling that story for why those costs continue to go up. And that's not a bad thing, because in some communities it's going to mean you served 581 more people in the last year. And that is a good return on the investment that you're making, but your costs are going to increase in that. And we are seeing an increase in demand across the state, across the nation for our services.
Right.
So that's going to cost more as well. And so how we need to continue messaging that while this is an area that we want to see a return, that return is going to look different than if what we're doing is getting more effective in our manufacturing of a widget. So that's part of our charge to make sure that we can continue to educate elected leaders on what that looks like. This will be the final budget of Governor DeWine's administration. He will take some big priorities forward to try and set the foundation kind of his legacy as a governor. The Ohio General Assembly will likely say thank you, and we're gonna do our own thing and put some different priorities in there. So we could see a very different budget at the end of the process than we see upon introduction as well. So some of the priorities that we're putting forward in this, and yes, I'm very well aware that this last piece of this slide cannot be read. In any iteration, even if we print it on the big sheets, as your staff well knows, you still cannot read this. But it's indicative of one of the challenges that we have with boards. We want to increase the general revenue funds and the investment for community mental health and addiction services, specifically within the 421 line item. The 421 line item is the line item within the state budget that is the primary fund source of state GRF for ADAM boards throughout the state. We want to also increase flexibility for boards, because what this spreadsheet shows is every board along the left column and then every line item that you receive from the state in terms of GRF and federal fund sources that come through in an allocation basis. General revenue funds, state tax funds. So what that looks like, if you looked at this form 10 years ago, there were probably 14 fewer columns on it. What we've seen over the past several years is the increase of specialty and priority programs that come with a little bit of money and a whole lot of strings. So in this, you have a line that says you'll receive $49,500 for recovery housing from the state. Nobody's challenging that recovery housing is a good thing, but $49,500 is likely not your full investment in recovery housing in this community. So can we pull these together in some things that are more flexible that you can then blend and braid with the local resources and the investments that you're making? That's a lot of what our focus is right now, because that $49,500 also has a reporting requirement that is not associated with any other line item in this budget. So you have staff that are now quarterly, monthly, biannually, and probably annually submitting reports that, to our knowledge, are not helping to document the return on investment of those investments. We also specifically want to talk about the continuum of care line item and how it has been pushed forward. So what you have on this slide is that for the last 10 years, the base allocation for boards that are flexible funds haven't moved a dollar. So there are 4 parts of this line item that comes to you with some flexibility, and it hasn't changed in 10 years. However, the far left column there, or the second column, shows you that the appropriated amount in that line item has increased quite dramatically over the last several years. So this is, yes, exactly, this slide. Nope, this one, I went too far. Which is a little bit hard to read, but maybe more available on the page you have there. Within that line item, we now have several carve-outs that are specific programs. Those that are in blue are still appropriated to the boards to make funding decisions about. Some of those that are in white are maybe some funds come through the board, maybe not. And a few of those are very direct to specific agency programs that effectively advocated with their legislators to get an earmark in the budget, which is functionally what that is. So some of what we're trying to do is say, hey, you have to maintain your flat funding within the 2024 number, but if that 107 million became available for board-based allocations, that's gonna look like an increase for boards. And how do we make sure that we can make some of that argument as well?
Shouldn't the allocation go up with inflation? How's the number?
The way that the government line items are funded is there's not a guarantee that the inflation is baked into that. So that is why we continue to advocate with them. If you look at these numbers in the appropriated amount, that's not going to be a direct match with growth over time. The state budget grows annually, but not each line item equitably. We'll see new line items introduced, some removed, some changes, some not. So that is the starting point that we are at for a budget. We also know that there are a number of pressure points in communities. Things like we still need work on crisis services and crisis rates. That's going to be an amount of advocacy coming from the field because it's not looking like it's going to be introduced in the governor's as introduced budget. But this is another area where we are in agreement with many partners in the field, and we'll say that's something that we've kind of made a commitment to that we have to hold and continue moving forward. Workforce challenges are something that exist in every community throughout the state. You have an increased number of individuals that are coming and trying to access services, and you don't have a parallel trend of increasing numbers of people coming into work in this field. So that's a challenge many communities are also facing. Part of that is really baked into how the financing of our system works. Most healthcare will tell you that Medicaid is not the best payer of services, but commercial insurance or others will say they're coming in higher, Medicaid's not gonna be the best rate. In community behavioral health, often the Medicaid payment is the best payer of services in this space. And the best payer is generally not a great one. So trying to make it all work with the Medicaid rates as they are structured, with the staffing prices, with the individuals that can come in and say, hey, insert service category over here, offered a $5,000 signing bonus, I'm gonna jump. Nursing staff is hard to keep in our agencies. Master's level trained individuals are hard to keep in our agencies, and some of that's because they can get paid more elsewhere with different pressures in the systems that they're serving. So we also need to kind of evaluate within the public systems, where can we increase investment and where can we decrease any other burden that may be there as well? And those are challenges that are systemic right now, and nobody has a single good answer for, but we all collectively need to keep working on. Questions? That was a lot, fairly quickly.
Great workshop. Outside the scope of when we were under the COVID exceptions for public meetings, can a public body meet, a public body, including committees, meet virtually?
The question is phrased in such a way that I have to answer yes and no.
Okay.
What I will tell you with a little more specifics, there are public bodies in the state of Ohio that have explicit authority to meet virtually. ADAM boards are currently not on that list. So this public body cannot meet virtually, either as a board or a committee. However, House Bill 257 that is pending before a Senate committee would grant you that authority with some requirements and some exceptions. It is a bill that we as an association are very supportive of because we think that that flexibility would help with your committee meetings. We know that during the pandemic it helped with attendance and participation. So there are a handful of public bodies that had prior authority for virtual meetings, and then House Bill 257 represents a collective of many of the volunteer public bodies like ADAM boards that have come together to say we don't want to each individually have our own mechanism for this, but we do want to collectively have the ability to do this within certain requirements. So there are things like if you want to put a tax levy on the ballot, that vote has to be at an in-person meeting, but a lot of your committees and a lot of your standard business meetings would be able to be virtually, and individuals would be able to virtually join and be counted for a quorum and vote. That bill had strong support out of the House, was passed, I think, with only 1 or 2 dissenting votes. So it had strong bipartisan support. It is currently in a Senate committee with no formal known opposition, but the General Assembly is home running for office right now, not in Columbus passing a lot of bills. So we're hoping that post the November election, when they come back for a lame duck cycle, we may be able to get that one across the finish line.
Okay, so currently there is a statute that sets forth the exceptions to the current.
Unfortunately, no, it is not a single statute.
Okay.
There are different entities that have their own authority. For instance, your local developmental disabilities board has its own authority within the DD section of statute in order to do that. And there are a couple of others. I think it's soil and wastewater treatment, some of your community colleges, but it's not one section that says this is how y'all do it. It is exceptions to that standard section. What we're trying to change in the collective is that standard section.
With the new legislation.
Yes.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Liz. Great work. Thank you.
Is this going to be available electronically?
Yeah, we can make that available electronically.